My breath caught in my throat the instant his hand, pale as winter moonlight, quivered as he offered that shredded cuff, as though it carried the weight of his shattered secrets. I was threading my needle when I sensed him standing there, a silent figure in the doorway of my little tailor shop. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dusty window panes, painting golden rectangles across the tiled floor, but he moved in the shadows. I paused mid-stitch, the hum of the sewing machine dissolving into eerie quiet. His charcoal suit hung off his frame like an old grief. The left cuff was ripped down to fraying threads, ragged as if torn in desperation. He didn't speak. He didn't even meet my eyes. Instead, he extended that torn sleeve toward me, fingertips brushing against mine for the briefest moment. Cold, trembling. It felt impossible to look away. All at once, I realized this wasn't a simple repair. It was an unspoken plea. I swallowed hard. "Come in," I said, my voice softer than I intended. My heart pounded in my ears as he stepped across the threshold. The bell above the door tinkled, but it sounded distant, like a warning. He closed the door behind him, cutting us off from the outside world. He folded his arm over the counter, curling his other hand protectively around the damaged fabric. His suit, once immaculate, now looked like a battle flag. Dark gray, streaked with unseen dust, the fabric worn thin at the elbow. He kept his gaze low, but I could feel those storm-tossed eyes on me, measuring every move. I laid the sleeve flat on the counter. My fingers, trained by years of stitching, hovered over the tear. The rip wasn't straight. It zigzagged, as though someone had yanked at the cuff with frantic urgency. One glance told me this shirt had been through more than a careless stumble. It had been wrenched, perhaps in anger, perhaps in panic. I reached for a spool of silver-gray thread. Each coil gleamed under the shop's single bare bulb, like a promise of restoration. As I guided the thread through the needle's eye, the man's breathing became audible, soft, uneven, as though he feared every exhale might tear him further. Why does his pain echo my own? I thought, recalling the night my father's shop nearly burned down, the smoke choking my lungs as I rescued his sewing box. That memory had taught me that tears, whether in fabric or in hearts, could be mended, but only with care and attention. He watched me work in strict silence, shoulders rigid. I slipped the needle into the fabric, pulling the thread taut. With each small stitch, I felt an electric charge, as if we were bound together by that tiny seam. I trimmed stray threads, then tucked the edges with precise, almost reverent movements. Midway through, his hand twitched again. I paused, glancing over my shoulder. He was staring, really looking, as though deciding if I was friend or foe. My stomach fluttered. Underneath the layers of tailor's chalk and cotton dust, I sensed something vulnerable in him, like a wounded bird beneath stiff feathers. "Almost done," I whispered, more to steady myself than to inform him. The final stitch slipped into place, and I pressed the fabric flat. The cuff looked whole once more, but the story it carried remained alive in my mind. I set down the needle and gently slid the sleeve across to him. He picked it up with a delicate grip, as though afraid to crush it. His eyes flicked over the seam, and I held my breath. After a long moment, he lifted his gaze to mine. For the first time, I saw something beyond caution, something like relief. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small white card, pressing it into my palm before I could tuck the sleeve away. The initials AM were embossed in silver, simple and unreadable. No address, no title, just letters that seemed to vibrate with untold weight. I opened my mouth to ask what they meant, but he turned away, his posture stiffening like a shutter closing. The long silence stretched between us until he finally murmured, "Thank you," and stepped toward the door. I darted after him. "Wait, do you need anything else? Another repair? A different thread?" He paused, one hand on the doorknob, then let go. He didn't look back. "No," he said, Voice distant. Just remember the cuff. Then the door clicked shut, and the shop bell jingled its lonely farewell. Alone again, I slipped the card into my apron pocket. It sat between my scissors and my chalk, a strange artifact in the world of fabric scraps. My hands trembled as I picked up the repaired cuff and smoothed it against my cheek, as though hoping to catch a trace of his scent, or perhaps the echo of his fear. I propped the cuff on a small mannequin, then sank onto my stool, head spinning. The shop felt impossibly vast, its colors muted, the rows of thread spools suddenly alien. Outside, dusk crept in, darkening the corners until I could barely make out the patterns on my workbench. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. The white card lay between two open notebooks, pages filled with neat rows of stitches and hemming techniques. All that training, and yet I found myself staring at two silver letters, A.M. Who were these letters for? My pulse pounded as I held the card in my fingers, tracing the embossed initials. I thought about the man, his haunted eyes, the tremor in his hand, the way he guarded that ripped cuff as though it were his last shred of dignity. Should I search his name? I wondered. My finger hovered over the search bar on my phone. Part of me wanted to uncover every detail, confirm that I'd just encountered a myth, a rumor, a ghost. The other part feared what I might find, a tragedy too heavy to bear. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. My life until that moment had been simple: thread, cloth, scissors, and the comforting rhythm of the sewing machine. Now, an enigmatic stranger had woven himself into the fabric of my days, and terrifyingly, I felt a pull too strong to resist. I slipped the card into an envelope and set it on the counter, resolve stirring in my chest. Tomorrow I would return to the shop and find out what A.M. meant. I would face whatever door he opened next, even if it led me into heartbreak or danger. Because as I drifted to sleep that night, one thought rang clear. Some tears are destined to be mended, and some stories are meant to unravel. That night I couldn't stop thinking, who was A.M., and why did I care so much? When I Googled A.M., my world flipped inside out. Those two silver letters exploded into headlines about a phantom billionaire, his secrets laid bare under the harsh glare of the internet. I sank into the wobbly kitchen chair, the repaired cuff still resting beside my chipped teacup. The shop bell's memory echoed in my mind, but here in the quiet, the only sound was the steady hum of my laptop fan. With trembling fingers, I typed A.M. Tailor Shop into the search bar, and within seconds the initials A.M. bloomed into 100 stories I'd never imagined. The first hit screamed, Arian Mera, billionaire in seclusion. I clicked. A glossy photo of a man who could have been a movie star stared back at me. Broad shoulders in a midnight blue tuxedo, face half hidden in shadow, a single flashbulb frozen in mid-burst behind him. The caption read, Last seen at charity gala, vanished days later. My breath hitched. Did I really just stitch the sleeve of this mythic recluse? I thought, my palms growing slick. The next article detailed his escapades. Multi-million-dollar donations made under pseudonyms, whispered romances with A-list actresses, and that one public appearance so catastrophic, it sent his reputation spiraling. I scrolled through op-eds, speculating on his mental state, genius or ghost, philanthropist or phantom, each line twisting the knife of curiosity deeper into my chest. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the mouse clicks. I toggled to another tab. Why Arian Mera refuses the spotlight. The text described a man who'd retreated into self-imposed exile after his fiancée's tragic death. He'd hired an elite security detail to veil his estate behind earthquake-proof walls and private surveillance. Even his family rarely saw him. Every detail confirmed what I'd sensed in his trembling hands. This wasn't just a tear in fabric. It was a tear in a soul, desperate to stay hidden. I closed my eyes, replaying the moment I'd pushed that sleeve through the sewing machine. His silent plea had been more than fear of exposure. It had been the raw ache of someone terrified of being seen. And now, ironically, the internet had illuminated him for millions, whether he liked it or not. A surge of guilt washed over me. Had I intruded on his grief? I peeled back a mental memory of his eyes, haunted, red-rimmed, as though they'd witnessed unspeakable sorrow. In that instant, I realized, kindness can be a dangerous gift. By mending his shirt, I'd stepped into a story far bigger than mine, a story he'd spent years trying to bury. My tea had gone stone cold. I wrapped both hands around the mug, focusing on its warmth, trying to steady the whirl of thoughts. If he finds out I've uncovered his identity, will he see me as a betrayer? The idea twisted my gut. I'd only wanted to help him mend something broken. Now I was the one holding the stitch that might undo him. I closed the browser tabs and opened my phone's notes, fingers hovering over the AM card I'd tucked into my apron pocket. The initials glowed in the dim light of the screen. AM. Should I call him? My thumb hovered over the saved number, if I'd dared to save it. Each second felt like an eternity. The memory of his voice, soft yet clipped, echoed in my mind. Kindness often carries cost. My mind snapped back to my own world. Fabric scraps, chalk dust, the rhythmic click-click of my machine. That familiar world suddenly felt fragile, like a paper heart fluttering under scrutiny. I realized I was at a crossroads. I could retreat into my simple life, pretend I'd never learned the truth, or I could take a step into his world, where every gesture invited exposure and risked betrayal. I paced the small apartment, phone clutched to my chest. Outside, the city's evening chorus began. Distant traffic, a dog barking down the street, the low rumble of a passing bus. Inside, I felt pinned under the weight of two choices. The first, bury the secret, shove the card into a drawer, and return to my ordinary routine. The second, dial his number, brave the tempest of his reaction, and see if there was more to this connection than fabric and fear. My finger trembled over the call icon. A bead of sweat slid down my temple. I imagined his face, the tight line of his jaw, the uncertainty flickering in his eyes the moment he'd first met me. Would he scream at me for nosing where I didn't belong? Or would he confess in that low voice that a piece of him craved being known? Before I could make up my mind, my phone buzzed. My heart lurched. I glanced down. A single message from "Come back tomorrow. We need to talk." No name, no apology. Just 4 words that felt like both a summons and a warning. My breath caught. I stared at the screen, rereading the text as though I could divine tone from the plain black font on white. We need to talk. The same phrase used when relationships splintered, when truths came tumbling out. It promised nothing, but demanded everything. I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the phone as though it were the cuff I'd repaired. My thoughts ricocheted. Did I want to go back or run away? The safety of my shop beckoned. Steady work, predictable customers, no secrets too heavy to bear. Crossing his threshold again meant stepping into a world of opulence and pain. I wasn't sure I could navigate. But when I closed my eyes, I saw those red-rimmed eyes, felt the tremor in his hands, heard the tremulous whisper of a man who'd trusted me with his shame. Despite the danger, despite the headlines, I felt a pull stronger than fear, an odd conviction that mending that tear was meant to be more than a fleeting act of kindness. I rose and set the laptop on my desk, resolved. Tomorrow I would return to the tailor shop at dusk, pack my kit, and head back to that massive estate. I would stand before him, heart hammering, and ask him what he wanted to say. No more hiding behind silence or thread, because some seams are meant to bind people together, not keep them apart. And after everything, I couldn't ignore the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, we could mend more than just fabric. My stomach clenched as I stared at the message. Come back tomorrow. We need to talk. Did I want to go back or run away? Midnight oil burns differently when you're about to meet a legend. Every second stretches, every breath tastes like anticipation and dread. I pulled the hood of my coat tighter as I stepped out of the cab into the chill of night. In the silence, the street lamps above seemed to flicker, hesitant to illuminate the mansion before me. The address on my phone hadn't lied. Towering iron gates loomed ahead, their ornate scrollwork black as spilled ink. Each vertical bar felt like a judge's gaze, weighing my worth before I even pressed the buzzer. My heart thundered in my chest. A small-town seamstress accustomed to patching rips in cotton shirts and hemming bridesmaid dresses, was about to cross the threshold into the world of Aryan Mera, the elusive billionaire. Only hours ago, I'd stared at his message on my screen. Come back tomorrow. We need to talk. And now tomorrow was here, drenched in moonlight and humming with unseen electricity. My breath came in shallow bursts. Doubts flooded in like frigid water through a cracked dam. What right did I have to sit with him again? To walk beyond those gates into his private realm? Every step toward the intercom made me feel more like an imposter wearing another person's life. The driver had dropped me at a spot where even the street ended in polite darkness. Beyond that lay his property. Manicured lawns, whispering hedges, a front facade that gleamed even under the wan light. I pressed the buzzer. A distant click echoed, and the gates slid open, their weight groaning in protest. I hesitated on the stone driveway, angle of the moon revealing my own elongated shadow. My pulse pounded so fiercely that I felt it in my fingertips. Even if he'd asked me here, I almost turned and ran. But something, perhaps the same thread of connection that had tied us through that torn cuff, guided my steps forward. Inside, the front hall was an exercise in restrained opulence. Candles flickered in sconces along marble walls, their flames dancing across gilded frames. Portraits of ancestors stared down at me with painted eyes, some stern, some curious. I felt their scrutiny as acutely as the iron gates moments before. The air smelled of old wood and lavender polish, a heady contrast to the antiseptic chill I'd expected in a billionaire's home. At the far end, a solitary figure waited beside a grand staircase. Aryan stood in shadow, hands clasped behind his back. His silhouette was familiar now, the broad shoulders, the slight forward lean, the effortless composure. Yet tonight his posture bore a different weight, as if the very walls held their breath while he decided whether to welcome me or send me away. He moved with quiet precision. When he turned, it was as though all the candles guided their flames toward him. He took measured steps, each one deliberate, as if he walked on a floor of memories he dared not shatter. His gaze met mine, and in that instant, I saw vulnerability beneath his poise. He was still guarded. Every muscle seemed poised for retreat, but the guardrail had loosened. He spoke at last, voice low and calm. "Thank you for coming." Those words carried no warmth and no chill, only acknowledgement. He gestured toward a side door. "This way." I followed, acutely aware of how different this place felt from my shop. There, linen curtains fluttered in the breeze, skeins of thread lay scattered like confetti, and I knew the exact weight of every scissor shears. Here, every step echoed on polished stone. Every whisper of fabric against my coat sounded loud. My fingers itched to touch something familiar, a bolt of cloth, a thimble, but instead I clenched and unclenched my fists at my sides. He led me down a corridor lined with tall windows. Outside, the moonlit grounds stretched into darkness, punctuated by statues and topiaries. Inside, the air grew warmer, scented now with sandalwood and something else I couldn't name. An amber undertone that felt like memory itself. At the end, a heavy wooden door swung open to reveal a private atelier. High ceiling, floor-to-ceiling shelves stacked with rolls of fine fabric, a single tailor's dummy draped in midnight blue velvet. On a glass-topped table lay the jacket. It was exquisite, bespoke Italian wool, hand-stitched lapels, custom lining of gold silk. A single tear fanned out along the left shoulder seam, the edges carefully frayed. This wasn't the rumpled shirt from the shop. It was a garment fit for a gala, worthy of a red carpet. And somehow, I was here to mend it. I approached the table, heart fluttering like a trapped bird. My calm professional demeanor cracked as nerves fluttered in my stomach. He stood behind me, silhouette outlined by soft lamplight. "I trust you with this," he said. His voice was steady, but I sensed the gravity. He wanted to see if I could handle more than a simple cuff. Could I restore perfection to a piece so precious, and perhaps restore something in him too? I swallowed and lifted the jacket, its weight both luxurious and intimidating. My fingers brushed the torn edge. I could feel his eyes on my back, testing my confidence. With a deep breath, I laid the fabric across my lap and began to thread the needle. He watched intently, as though my every move would reveal my true intentions. This was his domain, precision and control, where everything had its place. Inviting me into this sanctum was a test. Would I falter? Would I break under pressure? Or would I prove that my hands, trained on humble cotton, could also honor velvet and silk? I wanted to show him I was more than a seamstress churning out small-town fixes. I wanted to prove that empathy and skill could bridge our disparate worlds. Each stitch was a statement that I belonged here, that I could mend more than fabric, that I could mend the fissures in his solitude. I worked methodically, dabbing my forehead with the back of my hand whenever my pulse thundered too close to my fingertips. The atelier was quiet, except for the soft whisper of thread through wool. When I paused to examine my work, I caught glimpses of him reflected in a mirrored panel, arms folded, expression unreadable. We spoke little. Words would have shattered the fragile cocoon of focus we'd built. Instead, our connection grew through silence, through the careful, rhythmic pressing of thread, the gentle tug of each tiny stitch. At one point, I felt his breath brush my ear as he leaned in to inspect a row of uniform tacking. I dared not move. Time slowed. I was both here and somewhere else, suspended in a moment between before and after. Keep your concentration. Don't let him see your hands shaking. But what if he sees? What if my fear undercuts his trust? Can I let someone heal more than my clothes? Or will I regret opening the door to this stranger? After what felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat, I fastened the final stitch. The tear vanished, replaced by an invisible seam that held the fabric's elegance intact. I gently pressed the area with a micro steam brush he provided, smoothing each fiber until the line shimmered like it had always been whole. I looked up. He stood closer now, scrutinizing the repair. His fingers reached out, grazing the seam. I held my breath. His lips curved, just slightly, and I thought I saw gratitude there. Or something deeper. Relief. He stepped back and offered me a glass of water from a nearby sideboard. My hand still trembled, so I accepted it gratefully. As I sipped, I realized how dry my throat had become. He studied me over the rim of his glass, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "I've brought you here not only for your skill," he said softly, "but because I want to understand the woman behind these needles." His words hovered in the warm air. I set down the glass and met his gaze. The atelier's light pooled around us like a spotlight. In that charged quiet, I felt exposed, yet strangely anchored. My hand lingered on the fabric as I met his eyes, and I realized he wasn't just mending clothes. Every thread I pulled seemed to unravel more than fabric, as if each stitch teased out hidden stories woven into his soul. I eased the jacket onto my lap, the atelier's soft lamplight pooling around us. Outside, a light rain pattered against the windows, muffling the world beyond these walls. Inside, only the faint hiss of my breathing and the whisper of the needle-piercing velvet broke the hush. He stood behind me, silent, his presence like a patient shadow. I could feel his scrutiny. Each careful movement I made was observed, weighed, judged. Under that gaze, my usually steady hands trembled ever so slightly. I breathed deep and reminded myself I'd mended dozens of tears in everything from bridal gowns to dog-chewed sleeves. But this garment carried more than threads. It held the weight of a man's story. My mind drifted back to my own beginnings. The night my father's shop had burned to the ground. I was 16, covered in soot, clutching a singed spool of thread that survived the flames. Sewing became my resurrection. Stitch by stitch, I rebuilt our lives. Each seam I formed in this atelier echoed that memory, linking my past to this moment. He cleared his throat behind me. "That tear," he said quietly. "It's not from a tumble. It's—" He paused, choosing words as though weaving them. "From fidgeting? Sleepless nights." His voice wavered on the last syllable, betraying a vulnerability he rarely allowed. I slid the needle through the edge of the tear and pulled the thread taut. The velvet rippled like a quiet gasp. "You what?" I prompted softly, heart tightening. He ran a finger along the torn seam. "I can't stop. My mind races when I can't sleep. I pick at my clothes until they give way." He gave a wry half-smile. "Even billionaires have bad habits." I offered him a gentle nod, keeping my eyes on the fabric. We all have our ways of coping. In that moment, I realized we were both survivors of sudden loss. His fiancée's name haunted every donor list entry, every whispered rumor. My father's face flickered in my mind, ash-streaked, defeated, yet determined to teach me to sew. We shared a language of scars and silences. I tucked loose fibers into place. "You know," I said, voice soft, "my dad's shop burned when I was a teen. I lost everything except my hands." The memory flared bright, firelight dancing on brick walls, my small fingers fumbling for a needle in the chaos. "That night," I continued, "I found his sewing box outside the rubble. I carried it home like a treasure." He inhaled sharply, as though the echoes of my past echoed in this room. I felt his gaze soften, the stoic barrier slipping. Here, in this quiet atelier, our shared grief folded us together. He with his lonely nights, tremoring through silk and velvet. I with my scars and shame, hiding vulnerability with humor and small talk. I glanced up. His eyes glistened with an emotion I couldn't name. Regret, relief, longing. His practiced composure cracked just enough for me to see the man beneath the billionaire facade. "I never told anyone," he whispered, "not even my manservant." That confession shook me. In my little shop, customers poured out personal dramas over coffee-stained towels. But here was a man who'd built empires and barricaded himself against intimacy, yet now stood unguarded before me. My laughter came almost involuntarily, a soft exhale to lighten the weight. "Everyone deserves someone who sees them," I said, threading the needle through a golden lining. "Even if it's just to mend a hole." My attempt at levity felt weak, but he smiled, a small curl of the mouth that spoke volumes. I masked my fragile heart with humor, steady hands hiding a storm of empathy. His stoicism shivered under the mention of loss. Those rare glints in his eyes were proof he still felt deeply. As I stitched the final few tacks, I sensed the tear was gone, but something else had shifted between us. The lamplight caught each tiny knot in the seam, like dewdrops on a spider's web, evidence of careful repair and resilience. I smoothed the fabric, then pressed it against the table, studying my work. He leaned in, voice hushed. "You've given this jacket new life." He paused, as though revealing a long-buried secret. "Show me yours." My fingers stilled around the satin lining. I blinked, startled. "What? My scars?" He nodded, eyes earnest. "I want to know your story. Every scar tells me something about you." My stomach nodded. I'd never shown my burn to anyone outside my family. My hand hovered over the cuff of my sleeve. Lowering my arm, I turned my palm toward him. A faded, jagged line curved across my skin, the mark of my own trial by fire. Under the atelier's gentle glow, it looked vulnerable, raw. My breath caught. For a long moment, we stood silent, two healers revealing private wounds. His lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, he extended his own hand, palm up, revealing a faint scar along his knuckles, a souvenir from the accident that claimed his fiancée. We stared at each other's hands, the ink-black velvet and ivory thread forgotten between us. Our scars hovered in the soft light, symbols of loss and survival. He broke the silence, voice trembling. I never thought I'd let anyone see this. I traced the line on his hand with a fingertip. And yet, here we are, I whispered, mending pieces of ourselves, one stitch at a time. He exhaled, a breath heavy with something like hope. Thank you, for listening, for seeing me. My heart swelled with unexpected warmth. In this sanctuary of fabric and light, we had woven a connection far finer than any thread. He said, "Show me yours," and pointed to the burn on my palm. In that instant, I realized this moment was more than about mending clothes. It was about stitching together two broken souls. He traced the line of my burn like a map to my past, each gentle stroke revealing more than skin. I lifted my sleeve and extended my arm toward him. Under the atelier's soft lamplight, the scar on my forearm glowed pale against the surrounding skin, an irregular river carved by flame. My breath caught, and I felt the old tug of shame. I half turned away, my chest tightening, but something in his eyes stopped me. There was no pity there, only careful curiosity. He drew closer, closing the small distance between us. His fingertip hovered before touching the scar, as though afraid it might vanish at the lightest brush. I remembered the night it formed, my father's tailor shop engulfed in fire, the heat roaring in my ears, smoke stinging my eyes. I'd carried my father's sewing box out into the street, my arm ablaze, but my hands unshaken. Since then, every stitch I made carried that fire's echo. He pressed his finger gently along the scar's length. I flinched at first, then let my arm rest still, trusting him. His touch was warm, respectful, no condescension. He studied the wound as if reading a story written on my flesh. Shame surged. This mark was private, hidden beneath sleeves and kindness, yet pride bloomed alongside it. This scar was my proof of survival. I met his gaze, refusing to shrink from my own history. His dark eyes softened. For the first time, I saw genuine empathy flicker there. No boardroom filter, no public mask. He wasn't looking at a tailor's mark. He was seeing me, stripped of role and title. He let his hand fall away, but kept his gaze locked on my arm. I pulled my sleeve down, heart still pounding. The atelier felt suddenly smaller, warmer, intimate. He spoke in a low voice that trembled slightly. "Thank you for showing me. I know what it's like to carry a wound you'd rather hide." I swallowed. His words wrapped around my chest like a bandage. "Everyone has their past," I said softly, drawing a breath. "Some are just more visible than others." He nodded and lifted the lapel of his jacket, revealing a thin, pale scar on his chest. The fabric of his shirt hugged his skin, but under that collar was a story I hadn't expected to see. He ran a thumb along the arc of his own scar. "I did this to myself," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. After I lost her, I thought pain could wash away guilt." His eyes glistened. "Turns out it only reminds you why you're hurting." I felt a pang of sorrow. Here was a man whose life spanned continents, whose name commanded headlines, yet he too turned to self-harm in a desperate search for relief. His confession moved me more than any corporate scandal ever could. "That night," he continued, "I stood on my balcony, the city lights below. I thought if I could hurt myself enough, I'd feel less empty inside. But the scar never erased the memories. Instead, It became a reminder I couldn't escape. My hand trembled, around the table's edge. Sympathy and fear warred within me. Could I hold space for someone so broken? I thought. But then I recalled my own survival. The fire, the smoke, the day I stitched my first seam to rebuild what was lost. I could bear witness to his pain. I'd already faced mine. He mended my garment. Now I must mend his trust. But can I sustain the weight of his sorrow? I've never let anyone see this wound. If she judges me, I'll vanish forever. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. My palm warmed his scar, lightly. "You're not alone," I said, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I understand how a wound can define you, if you let it. But it doesn't have to." He stared at our joined hands, surprise flickering across his face. Then he closed his eyes and exhaled, as though releasing a held breath. In that moment, the gap between tailor and billionaire, between helper and helped, seemed to evaporate. I turned back to the jacket lying on the dummy. The tear had been snuffed out by my stitches, but now another tear, one in his heart, felt poised for gentle repair. I picked up the needle and thread again, this time with renewed purpose. Each stitch carried more weight than before, the hope that even the deepest wounds could be closed, the promise that scars could become marks of resilience. As I worked, he circled the dummy, studying the restored seam. Soft rain began to patter against the atelier's windows, a quiet rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. Occasionally, his gaze flicked to me, no longer assessing my skill, but watching my expression, gauging my intent. When the final stitch was in place, I pressed the seam flat with a gentle iron. The jacket lay whole, pristine. I stepped back to let him view my work, but I wasn't looking for praise. Instead, I watched his reaction to the invisible line I'd sewn, an indicator of whether he trusted me with more than garments. He approached and ran his fingers along the shoulder, where my stitches hid perfectly in the weave. "You've given it new life," he said, voice warm. "Maybe you can give life back to me, too." The invitation hung in the air, vulnerable and raw. Tears pricked my eyes as I realized he wasn't asking only for skill, but for companionship in healing. He motioned to a small sitting area in the corner of the atelier, where a tea service waited untouched. "Stay for tea?" he asked, pulling 2 delicate cups toward me. I nodded, words caught in my throat. As he poured, I admired his careful movements, how he measured each drop, how he settled into the chair with an ease that told me this room was his sanctuary. For the first time, I felt welcomed here. My apron and thread felt out of place, yet I no longer longed for the familiar chaos of my shop. This silence, this shared vulnerability, was weaving us together more tightly than any seam. He handed me a cup of fragrant herbal tea. The steam curled between us, carrying hints of chamomile and warmth. I wrapped my hands around the porcelain, letting the heat forego the chill that had clung to my skin. We sat quietly, sipping. The rain's soft drumming provided a gentle soundtrack. Neither of us spoke for several moments, allowing the calm to settle around us like freshly laid fabric. Finally, he met my gaze. His eyes were clear, unguarded. "I need you," he whispered. His confession struck me like a gentle bolt of lightning. In that simple sentence lay more meaning than any corporate communique or public address. He needed my skill, yes, but more than that, he needed human connection, someone who understood the language of scars and stitches. I felt my own resolve crystallize. "And I need you," I replied softly. "Not just for this jacket, but for who you are, and who I'm becoming through you." As the rain streaked the window panes, we sat there in matching silence, 2 souls bound by burn marks and heart scars, realizing that mending fabric was only the beginning of mending ourselves. He handed me a needle, daring me to mend more than cloth. He settled beside me on the low leather stool, his cuff held between gloved fingers. A neat slit marred the crisp white linen, barely 2 inches long, yet it felt monumental. The atelier's single overhead bulb cast long shadows, and for a moment I hesitated. Teaching him would mean revealing my process, exposing the careful choreography behind each stitch. But when he looked at me, vulnerability in his eyes, I couldn't refuse. I picked up the needle and handed it to him, silver thread already knotted at the end. "Watch me first," I murmured, guiding his hand to the fabric. His fingers closed around mine. Warmth spread from our palms into my chest. The proximity was unthinkable. Tailor and client sharing the same frame of reference, shoulder to shoulder, breath intermingling. I showed him how to pierce the linen's edge at a 90-degree angle, then pull the thread through until a neat loop formed. His first stitch was clumsy. The needle bent the wrong way. The linen puckered. He winced, but he didn't pull back. Instead, he laughed, a soft, self-deprecating chuckle, and tried again. The second pass was straighter, the third straighter still. I let him practice a half-dozen times, offering gentle corrections, my fingers brushing his as I repositioned his grip. With each stitch, his confidence grew. I could sense the tension loosening in his shoulders, the rigid control he maintained so steadfastly beginning to melt. A smile tugged at his lips when he finally executed a tidy hem stitch. "Not bad for a first-timer," I teased softly, and he glanced at me, eyes bright with a childlike triumph. In that small circle of light, our lonely worlds intertwined. His life had been one of boardrooms and barricades, mine of simple fabrics and crowded shop benches. Yet here, the simple joy of learning something new bridged every divide. The rhythm of needle, through cloth, thread sliding smooth. This was a language we both understood, even before words filled the silence. He straightened, examining his handiwork as though seeing it for the first time. "I never thought I'd find satisfaction in something so ordinary," he admitted, voice low. "I used to lose myself in spreadsheets and negotiations. But this feels real." His gaze returned to the linen cuff, and I saw pride flicker in his eyes, a spark of humanity I'd never witnessed at our business dinners or headlines. Watching him learn, I felt a warm glow of significance. The seamstress who once patched up dog-chewed jeans and thrift store jackets was now empowering a man who shaped industries. My role had shifted from passive craftsman to guide, from observer to companion. My heart swelled at the thought that my hands he'd once trembled before, could help him reclaim a piece of normal life. We leaned back against the work table, catching our breath. I reached into a carved oak box and lifted 2 slender volumes. "Take your pick," I said, offering him the books, one on 19th century poetry, the other a collection of jazz standards. "I thought we might talk about what you like." He took the poetry book, flipping through pages lined with tiny, looping verses. "Words have always comforted me," he said. "I used to memorize passages to stay awake on those long nights." I smiled. "Music does that for me. My father had a record player in the shop, Ella Fitzgerald and old Bollywood songs. They mended my heart when our world collapsed." We speak of normal passions, books, music, tiny windows into his secret life. He told me how he'd once funded a fledgling orchestra in Vienna anonymously, how the cello's low hum soothed him when grief felt too loud. I spoke of my first sewing machine, a battered singer handed down by my aunt, and how each stitch was a lifeline after the fire. In the gentle exchange, labels of billionaire and tailor faded. We were 2 people craving connection, trading confidences over needles and notes, building trust one shared secret at a time. He confessed he'd sought normalcy, but feared it as much as craved it. "Public life taught me control," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "But the real test is letting go, letting someone see you unguarded." He tapped the stitching on his cuff. I wanted to know if I could handle being fragile. I understood that. My own motivation had shifted from merely mending cloth to unlocking his humanity. "Fragility isn't weakness," I said softly. "It's a doorway to genuine strength." A sudden knock at the atelier door snapped us back to reality. We'd built a fragile bubble of intimacy. That rap of knuckles felt like a warning siren. Arian's eyes widened, years of practiced composure abandoned as panic flared. He muttered, "Not now." But his manager's voice came through the door. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the security cameras flagged unusual activity outside." His calm fractured. I can't have attention drawn here," he stammered. He pressed a finger to his lips, then shot me an apologetic look. The billionaire facade reassembled itself in an instant. Square shoulders, cool detachment. "Please wait here." He slipped away, leaving me alone in the dimly lit atelier with the click of the door latch. Silence closed in. My heartbeat thundered. For a moment I wondered if our shared trust had been an illusion, a brief respite before he retreated behind his walls once more. I rose and drifted to the windows, peering into the manicured gardens beyond. Rain-slick hedges glistened under faint security lights. My mind raced. Did he regret showing me his vulnerability? Was I about to lose him again, caught between secrecy and exposure? Then the door reopened. He stood there, breathless, eyes intense. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt beside me. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice raw. "I never wanted to let anyone in, and now I can't bear the thought of you leaving." He took my hand, thumb stroking the back. The cuff lay forgotten on the table, stitches half finished. His closeness erased the distance the manager's knock had tried to impose. He grabbed my hand and said, "Don't leave." In that charged moment, I realized this wasn't about completing a hem or finishing a repair. It was about choosing to stay, trusting that our fragile bond could withstand the world's demands and the distance between our 2 very different lives. Every boundary we crossed made the world outside silently tremble, like a secret earthquake no one dared acknowledge. The bell above my shop door tinkled mid-morning as Arian stepped inside, sunlight glinting off the brass handle. In his hands was a bouquet of wildflowers, bright yellows and purples tangled in loose stems, as if picked from a meadow rather than a florist's arrangement. He offered them to me with a shy, crooked smile I'd only ever seen behind the safety of 4 walls and candlelit galleries. "Thought these might brighten your day," he said softly. His voice echoed in the cozy space I called home. Walls lined with threads, my father's old Singer sewing machine in the corner, and bolts of fabric stacked like colorful bricks. The contrast between his tailored black coat and the riot of color in those flowers felt like a visual whisper that our worlds were colliding. Almost as soon as he stepped through the door, I felt the shop's usual hum shift. Locals dropped their heads, pretending not to stare. Mrs. Rana at the counter, the one who complained about tasseled curtains, watched from behind her newspaper. I could hear the soft murmur of speculation. "Isn't that the billionaire's tailor? I heard she's been going to his mansion at midnight." Their eyes flicked to Arian and back to me, as though we were a sudden, scandalous exhibit in their small-town gallery. Thrilled pulse racing. This was the man I'd risked so much to know. Yet shame flushed my cheeks. I was afraid of judgment, of being seen as the gold digger or the eccentric seamstress ensnared by gossip. My shop had always been a sanctuary, a place where cloth and craft reigned supreme. Now its walls felt porous, as though every whispered word threatened to tear away the comfort I'd carefully built. He, however, stepped inside as if he belonged. Not a muscle in his frame betrayed surprise at the glances. But I knew the truth. Beneath his calm, he was more terrified of losing my trust than of what the world thought of us. I'd seen that fear in his eyes when he'd shown me his scars. And now, having invited me into his private realm, he faced the peril of our connection being splashed across headlines. He set the bouquet on my counter and removed his coat, revealing a simple white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, relaxed sleeves folding at the wrists. "I thought we might work on something a bit more colorful today," he said, eyes flicking to the dress form draped in emerald green silk. It was a commission for a local wedding party, a hem that needed shortening, a bodice that needed reshaping. Normally, I worked alone on such tasks, but today, I welcomed his presence. He rolled up his sleeves, and I noticed a faint oil stain on his cuff, a small sign of genuine effort, a man unafraid to get his hands dirty for the sake of normalcy. He helps me alter a simple dress. Laughter flows easily between us. I clipped the excess fabric from the hem and motioned for him to hold the dress at the waistline. His hands, broad and usually so precise in boardrooms, trembled slightly as he steadied the silk. He glanced at me, uncertain, then grinned as he caught a stray thread. "I think I've inherited your hangover rip technique," he joked, and I laughed, the sound ringing out like warm bells. With each snip of the shears, we fell into easy rhythm. I marked the new hemline with chalk and handed the dress to him. "Go on," I encouraged. "Give it a trim." He bent carefully, scissors grazing the silk in a straight line. A triumphant grin spread across his face when the cut was perfect. In his mansion, every surface was immaculate, every interaction measured. Here in my shop, we danced through the clutter. Pins scattered like confetti, draft beer bottle caps used as thread holders, the occasional dog-eared pattern taped to the wall. This intimacy, the shared mess, the comfortable banter, felt like a stolen secret from another life. Each laugh grounded me, reminded me why I'd risked stepping into his world, to find moments of pure, ordinary joy. I'm falling for a man who shouldn't exist. My heart fluttered as I watched him hem the dress with uncharacteristic precision. In another world, I might have dismissed him as a myth, a story that belonged on magazine covers. But here, the real Aryan, laughing, awkward, enthusiastic, was more magnetic than any headline. I'm afraid to love her, but more afraid to let go. I caught him adjusting a pin at my waist level, and his eyes met mine in a silent question. Was I as willing to risk as he was? The moment stretched, charged with unsaid promises and shared vulnerability. A sudden flash of light made us both turn. A local reporter, camera in hand, peered through the doorway. The click of the shutter echoed loud in the cramped space. I felt my stomach drop. The reporter mouthed, "Thank you," and slipped out as quietly as she'd entered. I looked at Aryan, whose face had gone pale, eyes wide with alarm. The laughter drained from the room, replaced by a silence so dense it pressed against my eardrums. He grabbed my arm gently, steering me behind a rack of fabrics. "Are you hurt?" he whispered, concern flickering in his eyes. But I was more stunned than anything else. That night, when I opened my front door, my phone buzzed with notifications, and the morning headlines glared up at me. "Billionaire spotted in local tailor shop." His face went pale in the glow of my screen, and I realized our private world had shattered into public spectacle, forcing us to decide which boundaries we'd cross next and which we'd have to rebuild. Headlines screamed our names, and terror seized his heart. I was hanging up the last finished dress in my back-fitting room when the first flash went off against the window. At first I thought it was a construction crew next door, until the rapid staccato of shutters multiplied. One bright strobe after another, pulsing through the thin glass like urgent Morse code. My breath caught as I peered through the curtain. A horde of paparazzi lined the street outside, cameras aimed straight at my shop. In the cramped back room, I pressed my palm against the door, heart hammering. I'd repaired countless tears in fabric, but nothing had prepared me for this rip in my life. Hide in my back room, trembling, the muffled din of clicking shutters and shouting voices echoed through the walls. One photographer's silhouette drifted by the frosted front window, camera raised. I sank to the floor, knees pressed tight to my chest, hands shaking so badly I could taste the metallic tang of panic. Every instinct screamed to flee, to erase myself from the glare. But I couldn't move. I thought of Aryan, his promise that I was safe, that this world of spotlight and rumor would stay at arm's length if I trusted him. Now that promise felt threadbare. Contracts private security. Insists I stay home. I finally heard his voice booming from the front. "Everyone, clear out!" The shop bell chimed as he pushed past the startled clerk. Seconds later, a cluster of burly security guards filed in, herding me through the back door and into a black SUV idling on the curb. Arian climbed in beside me, suit jacket flapping behind him. His jaw was set so tight I feared it might crack. He turned to me, eyes dark with something I couldn't name. "I'm sorry," he said, voice clipped. "You can't come back here today. It's not safe." He handed me a card for a private address, his guest suite at a nearby hotel. "You'll stay there until this blows over." Anger and hurt, her independence threatened. I felt fury spike through me, hotter than any iron's press. "Stay home," I echoed. "I run a business, Arian. I don't hide when things get tough." My voice shook with equal parts hurt and indignation. He was sheltering me, but it felt like a cage. "I want to face them, or at least face this on my own terms." He stared at me, confusion etched in the lines around his eyes. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I've spent my life protecting what matters by building walls. Let me do this one thing. Character conflict. His need to protect versus her need to stand by him." I tapped my foot against the floor, unwilling to be herded like a frightened child. "Maybe I don't want your protection," I said, tone brittle. "Maybe I want to protect you, too." The night he'd traced my burned scar came rushing back. How he needed me then, as much as I needed him. Why couldn't he see I was stronger than these walls he feared collapsing? He exhaled and flexed his fingers on the steering wheel. "I know you're strong, but sometimes the best strength is knowing when to accept help." They argue. First real confrontation, raw and painful. The SUV crawled through traffic as I and Arian sparred over fate and freedom. "Help isn't caging me," I shot back. "Trust isn't isolation." He flinched as though struck. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't get it. Out there they'll tear us apart. Your name next to mine, my secrets next to yours." I stared at him, tears stinging. "Then let them. I'm not afraid of the world, only of losing you to your fears." My words hung between us, raw and unapologetic. He storms out. "I fear I've lost him forever." He didn't answer. The next moment we'd arrived at the hotel. He opened the door for me, then closed it on my outstretched hand. "I'll handle this," he said, back stiff with resolve. "You stay safe." Before I could protest, he slipped away, his long coat trailing behind him as though pulling my heart in two directions. Left alone in the empty lobby, I felt a hollowness, like I'd been severed from the person I'd come to trust most. Doubt gnawed at me. Had I pushed him too far? Would he ever cross my threshold again? Psychological layer. Him. Flashbacks to betrayal. He can't bear. Repeating history back in his mansion's safe room, Arian's composure fractured. He sank onto a suede love seat and buried his face in his hands, mind reeling. He saw headlines from his past. Betrayal stacked like bricks, journalists exposing his fiancée's darkest secrets after her accident, investors turning on him during scandals, friends who vanished at the first sign of trouble. He'd built walls so high to keep the world out, only to find himself alone at the top. He couldn't let her suffer the same fate. Every instinct screamed to shield her, even if it meant locking her away. On my doorstep, its petals unmarred, its stem wrapped in silk ribbon. Tucked beneath lay a note in familiar, precise handwriting. "Meet me where the world can't find us." And in that promise lay the fragile hope that we'd find a way back to each other, beyond walls and whispers, where only trust could guide us home. He stood in the moonlight, silent, vulnerable, waiting. I followed the narrow path through the rose garden, each lantern casting haloed pools of light on the dew-kissed grass. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming petals. My pulse pounded so loudly I could barely hear the soft click of my heels on the cobblestones. The single white rose from the shop lay clutched in my hand, petals still fresh, its ribbon trailing like a promise. There he was, at the far end of the garden, beneath an ancient oak whose gnarled branches arched overhead like protective arms. His figure was framed by silver light, shoulders curved in apology, hands buried in his coat pockets. The tailored suit I'd seen him in countless times at midnight, stitching sessions, now hung on him as if he had nothing left to shield himself. He stood with his head bowed, shoulders slumped, each line of his posture written in regret. The vulnerability in his stance was as rare as a flawless seam, raw, unguarded. My heart hovered in my throat. I forced myself forward, determined to heal the rift that had ripped through us. Despite the sting of our argument, I knew our connection outweighed headlines and fear. He didn't turn as I approached. My footsteps were soft, but I saw his whole body tighten, an unconscious inhale. When I slowed to a stop 10 feet away, he exhaled, as though relieved that I'd come. After what felt like minutes, he looked up. Moonlight glinted in his eyes, now red-rimmed, shining with unshed tears. I took a trembling breath. "I came," I said, voice steady, despite the emotion thrashing beneath. "I'm here." He closed his eyes and ran a hand through his hair, tousling the perfect lines. "You shouldn't have," he murmured. "I hurt you. I pushed you away, not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid." His words hung between us, simple and raw. That moment marked our first real confession since the paparazzi siege. The ground beneath us felt as solid as any stitch I'd ever made, but my knees threatened to buckle. He admits he pushed me away out of fear, not love. His voice cracked. "I thought shielding you would keep you safe. But instead I built walls so high, I almost lost you." I stepped closer, so close I could see the tension lines at his temples. The moonlight traced the angles of his face, the same angles that once seemed cold and distant, now softened by remorse. Tears blurred my vision. I hadn't cried since the night I showed him my burn scar. Now tears welled without warning. Tears for the pain we'd both endured. Tears for the distance we'd allowed to grow. "I was angry," I said, voice catching. "Angry you didn't trust me enough to fight alongside you. But I understand now." His head dipped, and I heard him exhale a shaky breath. Then, as if the dam had broken, we both spoke at once, fragments of confession tumbling over each other. He apologized for the walls. I apologized for pushing him. His words wove through, mine until silence reclaimed us, punctuated only by the rustle of oak leaves. In that shared space, we realized that protection can become prison. His fortress of solitude had kept out everyone, including me. My insistence on independence had almost driven him further into isolation. Together, we discovered that love required neither shield nor sword, but a willingness to stand unarmed before life's storms. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a slim leather-bound portfolio. My curiosity flared. "What's this?" I whispered. He guided me toward a wrought-iron bench. We sat side by side, backs against the oak's gnarled trunk, the portfolio resting on his knee. He opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, Polaroid-style prints of moments I never knew he'd captured. He offers me a tour of his private gallery. Photos of us, moments I never knew were captured. He slid the first photo toward me. It was from our midnight session in the atelier, me threading his cuff with the expensive jacket draped over my lap. The soft lamplight, the concentration on his face, I recognized the exact fabric crease. My breath caught. Next came the picture of us laughing in my shop over the emerald green dress, scissors in his hand, chalk on my fingertips. Then the rose bouquet he'd brought, caught in midair between us. Each image was a silent testament. He'd been observing me as intently as I'd studied his every stitch. I traced a finger over each photo. My chest warmed with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. "You saved these?" I asked, voice thick. He nodded, looking down at my hand resting on the portfolio. I wanted to remember the real us, not the headlines. Moments no one else saw, I felt honored and trusted, as though he'd handed me the keys to his secret life. The pain of our argument dissolved into hope. Here, in the quiet embrace of the garden, our story belonged only to us. I watched her gaze soften as she looked at the photos. For the first time, I felt truly seen and accepted. No title, no wealth, just two souls connected by shared vulnerability. We closed the portfolio and sat in silence, fingers intertwined. The oak branch above us stirred, scattering silver petals of moonlight across our laps. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. He broke the hush. "There's one more," he said softly, pulling out a final photo and handing it to me. I unfolded the glossy print and stared. It was us, holding hands, walking down a moonlit corridor, me in my apron, him in a casual shirt, smiles brighter than any studio light. In that moment, we were unguarded, purely ourselves. But I had no memory of that night. In the last frame, he pointed to a photo of us holding hands, though I didn't remember that night. The revelation hung in the air, as potent and mysterious as the bond between us, beckoning me to uncover what lay behind that unremembered moment, and what it meant for the path we'd walk together. "How did I forget?" I whispered. "And why did you keep it?" He rose from the stone bench beneath the oak and offered his arm. "Come with me," he said, voice gentle but edged with purpose. I followed along the winding garden path, dew glistening on the petals of midnight blooms. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and earth. Lanterns overhead cast shifting patterns of light and shadow, turning the world into something half-dreamed. At the edge of the garden stood a wrought-iron door leading back into the mansion. It clicked open to reveal a narrow hallway lined with deep burgundy carpet and silent portraits of past generations. At the far end, a single door waited, unmarked, its brass handle gleaming. He took out a slender key from his coat pocket and fit it into the lock. The door swung open to reveal a small private study. Inside, shelves lined every wall, crammed with leather-bound journals, loose photographs, and a scattering of film negatives in sealed envelopes. The room felt like a vault of secrets, a hidden archive of moments meant for no eyes but his own. A single desk lamp illuminated a central glass display case, where several Polaroid-sized prints lay under its soft glow. He picked up the first photograph, a Polaroid of me asleep at my sewing machine, chest rising and falling with quiet exhaustion, my fingers still clutching a spool of thread. "You fainted that night," he said, voice hushed. "Your friend brought you home, but I couldn't sleep until I knew you were safe. I carried you here, and waited until you woke." He placed the photo back gently, as though touching glass might shatter the memory. I took solace in our connection, even when I was sleep-deprived and running on adrenaline. Each image reminded me that someone cared about more than fabric. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The first Polaroid was one I never remembered him taking. My mind swirled. The late-night sessions in the atelier, the hum of the sewing machine, the weight of exhaustion that had finally flattened me, but no recollection of him carrying me down the hall or laying me on this very sofa. My fingers trembled as I reached for the next photo, a fold of silver silk draped across a tailor's dummy, the loose ends of a hem mended by my hands. He'd captured my process, freezing the intimate choreography of needle and thread. I stared at the image, questioning my memory, questioning reality. Was our time together more cinematic than I believed? He guided me to a shelf where journals lay stacked, spines embossed with dates. "These are my private thoughts," he explained. He pulled down the journal marked August 2nd, 2025. Inside, neat handwriting traced the outline of that evening, when he'd invited me to mend the velvet jacket, when our conversation had turned to scars, when I had, for a moment, closed my eyes as he brushed my hair back. Moments I remembered, and some I didn't. His finger traced a passage. I watched her breathe, so serene despite the pain etched on her arm. I vowed to remember every heartbeat between stitches. He explains the photo was taken after I fainted from exhaustion. He carried me home. He cleared his throat. I wanted to remember every moment with you, even the ones you forgot in your sleep. You're the stitch that holds me together. My breath caught. Shock coursed through me, both at his careful preservation of these intimate moments and at the realization that my own recall was incomplete. Gratitude and embarrassment warred in my chest. Gratitude that he had cared so deeply, embarrassment that I had slept through such tenderness. I closed my eyes and exhaled. I had no idea. My voice quavered. I thought I was just a guest in your world, but you were my host in mine. He reached out, brushing my cheek with a thumb. You are part of my world now, he said softly. I wanted proof, not for others but for myself, that you were real. He moved to a corner of the room and retrieved a tailored jacket hanging behind a velvet curtain. The same midnight blue Italian wool, its lining whisper gold. But on the inside, near the chest pocket, was a small patch of pale silk embroidered with the word, forever. The patch was cut from the very fabric we'd mended together in the atelier, stitched by my own hands. He shows me a hidden patch on his jacket, stitched by my hands, labeled forever. He turned the jacket so I could see. My breath caught again. The embroidery was perfect, each letter intertwined with tiny silver threads. I looked up at him, tears glistening in my eyes. He slid the patch-stitched jacket into my hands. I wanted a constant reminder, he explained. Every time I wore this, I'd feel connected to you and to the hope you gave me. I smoothed the silk patch with trembling fingertips, determination igniting in my chest. No longer did I want to drift through our days half asleep, missing the moments that mattered. I wanted to live fully awake in this love. Every glance, every stitch, every shared breath. I turned back to him, eyes shining. I promise I'll never forget these moments again. My voice was firm, resolute. And if I do, please remind me. Just like you have here. He nodded, a small, relieved smile curving his lips. He stepped close and wrapped both arms around me, the warmth of his embrace grounding me. For a moment, the journals, the photographs, the silk-embroidered patch, all of it faded to the periphery, leaving only the two of us in the hush of the secret study. He released me and picked up the first Polaroid once more. These memories, they're ours, he said. No matter what happens, I want us to hold on to them. I took the photo and slipped it into my own pocket, alongside a well-worn spool of thread from my shop. Then let's make more, I said with a soft laugh. I want to fill your journals and camera rolls, every stitch and every sunrise, every tear and every tremor of laughter. He took my hand and said, let's never lose these moments. As we stood in that private sanctuary, surrounded by the archives of our past, I understood that memory and meaning were not fleeting. They were threads we wove together, forming a tapestry strong enough to withstand any unraveling. And with that promise sealed between us, I knew our next chapter was theirs to create. Awake, aware, and unforgettably alive. We could vanish again, or stand together in the glare. A week after our moonlit reckoning, an email landed in my inbox. An invitation to the annual Bright Futures Charity Gala. It was hosted by Arian's Foundation, the one he'd created to honor his lost fiancée's memory. This year, the guest list included the city's elite, CEOs, celebrities, philanthropists, and a throng of press corps eager for a spectacle. At the bottom of the email, in the same precise script I'd grown to recognize, was a personal note. Asha, please consider standing by my side at the gala. I want the world to see the truth in our story. A whim. My heart skipped. Stepping into his world under a spotlight felt like dancing on a knife's edge. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking as though urging me to choose. Disappear into the safe shadows of my shop? Or emerge, hand in hand, into a world that had tried to define me by his wealth? In the quiet of my apartment, I paced. On one hand, preserving my privacy meant continuing life as a seamstress. Familiar patterns, modest clientele, no intrusive lens angled at my face. On the other, accepting his offer meant declaring to every corner of society that our bond wasn't a late-night oddity, but a partnership built on shared scars and stitched secrets. I sank onto the sofa, phone in hand. I tapped out a reply. Yes, I'll stand with you. My pulse raced at the final tap, as though that one choice had already set a chain reaction. That evening, he met me at my shop's threshold, holding a single red rose, an echo of our first bouquet of wildflowers, but bolder. "Thank you," he said, slipping the rose into my apron pocket. His eyes were earnest. "Prove to the world, and to myself, that love can heal." His words held no demand, only hope. In that simple plea, I saw the mirror of our journey. Two damaged souls who'd torn down walls one stitch at a time. And now, at the gala, he wanted to weave our narrative into the public tapestry. The next day, we convened in his private suite, where two ensembles awaited. A flowing ivory designer gown for me, its bodice embroidered with silver threads echoing the stitches I'd made in his midnight atelier, and a midnight black tuxedo for him, cut to perfection. He handed me a small clutch in pale gold, then turned to fasten his cufflinks. They practiced walking the red carpet, she in designer gown, he in bespoke tux. We stepped onto the suite's private terrace, which overlooked the gala entrance. From the balcony we watched a test run, staff laying down the red carpet, lighting rigs angled to capture the first arrivals. I took a deep breath and held his arm. "Lead the way," I whispered. He offered me a hand at the start of the carpet and guided me forward. Each step was measured, heels clicking against the platform, the gown's train fanning out behind me. Flashbulbs from a practice drone camera imitated paparazzi. Strobe bursts flickering like distant lightning, heart thundered. He stayed close, one hand at my back to steady me, the other holding mine, warm and unwavering. At the terrace's edge, we paused under a single spotlight. My breath trembled, thoughts swirling. Would they see me as an accessory, a gold digger? Or would they sense the authenticity of our bond? I felt his hand tighten on mine. "You're beautiful," he murmured, voice steady. "But it's your courage I'm proud to show." His words were like a compass. They pointed me away from fear and toward resolve. I lifted my chin and smiled, letting the calculated warmth of the camera lights wash over me. In that moment, I found strength in vulnerability. Standing before the world, I embraced the trembling in my limbs as proof I was alive, fully present, fully committed. No longer just a seamstress hiding behind fabric, I was Asha, partner to a man who'd taught me to stitch hope into every seam. For Arian, the act of sharing his spotlight was revolutionary. He drew a quiet breath and squared his shoulders. In my reflection, I saw him release the tension that had weighed down his posture for years. Here beside me, he wasn't a recluse or a phantom philanthropist. He was a man willing to stand exposed for love's sake. When the night of the gala arrived, we arrived arm in arm. Reporters pivoted, cameras pivoted, lenses tracked our approach. The hush that fell over the entrance gave way to a crescendo of clicks and flashes. I felt each pop echo through my bones, yet at my side, Arian's presence was an anchor. As we stepped onto the red carpet, tongues wagged in hushed bursts. "Is that the seamstress from the local shop? Did you see him wait for her?" But when he paused before the banks of cameras, he turned to me, eyes intense, and said, "Asha, my partner, my equal." He held up his free hand for me to link my arm through his, then addressed the press. "Good evening. This is Asha, my partner in life and in everything that matters." His words were clear and firm. Cameras shifted focus to me. I offered a genuine smile, heart swelling as applause rippled through the assembled crowd. At the gala, tongues wag, cameras flash. He introduces her as Asha, my partner, my equal. I watched his face light up at the response. Respectful applause, nods, even a rare standing ovation from a corner of philanthropists moved by his declaration. In that instant, the public narrative bent to our truth. We stood together, not as headline fodder, but as two people whose love had bridged scars and stitched two lives into one. As we moved inside, a lull followed the initial frenzy. Arian guided me through the crowd, introducing me to benefactors and board members. Each handshake, each toast, felt less like a performance and more like a shared celebration of resilience. The chandeliers above glittered like constellations, and for the first time, I felt we truly belonged among the stars. The final applause thundered as the keynote speaker nodded toward us, two figures illuminated by 1,000 camera lights. In that electric moment, I realized the next choice would define us forever. Retreat into the shadows once more, or continue to stand, hands linked, willing to face every glare and every risk for this extraordinary love. And as the ovation swelled, I met Arian's gaze, knowing we had to choose, and together step forward into whatever awaited beyond the spotlight. From a torn shirt sprang a love neither of us dared imagine. Now every stitch we take is a promise of what we'll build next. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of my little shop, casting delicate patterns across the worn wooden floorboards. The familiar scent of cotton and cedar hung in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of fresh coffee from the back room. At the center of it all, Arian Mera sat at my old Singer sewing machine, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to guide a needle through a swatch of denim. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a teasing smile tugging at my lips. "Steady now," I called out, stepping forward to adjust his grip. "It's a straight stitch, not a cryptic business memo." He glanced up, cheeks coloring beneath his tailored collar. "I know," he said, voice muffled by the machine's hum. "But let me tell you, hemming jeans isn't exactly in the billionaire job description." I chuckled and reached over to steady his hand. "Well, we're rewriting job descriptions now. Today, apprentice tailor. Tomorrow, foundation director." He set the denim aside and wiped sweat from his temple. "Uneven hems," he declared dramatically, holding his scissors aloft like a sword. "At least yours are artistically uneven." I rolled my eyes. "My artistry keeps this shop alive. Your precision in boardrooms nearly cost me my first sewing machine." He laughed, the sound rich and unguarded, the same laugh that had echoed between us in the atelier's candlelight, in the hush of the private gallery, in my shop's cramped fitting room. In that moment, the years of fear and walls and public scrutiny melted away, leaving only two people who'd learned to trust each other, one stitch at a time. I sank into the wooden chair beside him. "Remember when you first handed me that shredded cuff?" I asked softly. "I never imagined we'd end up here." He looked at me, eyes bright. "Neither did I, but I wouldn't trade a single rip, tear, or sleepless night." He reached out, brushing a stray hair behind my ear, a small gesture that carried the weight of all the moments we'd shared. "You taught me that even broken things can become beautiful." Tears pricked at my eyes, tears of gratitude for the journey we'd taken, from a single torn shirt to the life we'd stitched together. "And you taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness," I replied. "It's the thread that binds us." We rose, and I led him to the back wall where I'd hung sketches and notes for our next project. "This," I said, running my hand across a pinned blueprint, "is our foundation proposal, mended and made new, tailoring as therapy for trauma survivors." His face lit up. "I love it," he said. "We'll use the estate's outreach funds, partner with local counselors, teach sewing as a way to process grief and rebuild self-worth." He paused, studying the layout. "And we'll hire artisans from the community, People like you, Asha. I smiled, heart soaring. Exactly. A place where everyone's scars, physical or emotional, can be honored and transformed. A space to mend more than fabric. He nodded, eyes shining with purpose. Our love started with a tear. Now it becomes the patchwork of hope for others. The shop bell jingled as my first student of the foundation, a war veteran named Maya, stepped inside. She carried a battered duffel bag and wore a tentative smile. Arian and I exchanged a glance. He slipped on a faded denim apron I'd kept behind the counter, and I handed Maya a simple sewing kit. "Welcome," I said, voice warm. "This is where we begin." Arian placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "We'll start with a small tear," he said, "and by the end of today, you'll see how every stitch can feel like taking back your story." I saw Maya's shoulders relax, just a bit, as she seated herself at a machine. The two of us stood side by side, mentor and co-mentor, tailor and CEO, ready to guide another soul toward healing. In that scene, I felt the full circle of our own transformation. Asha, who once rebuilt her life from ashes. Arian, who once retreated into solitude. Now together creating a sanctuary of new beginnings. Weeks later, under a clear spring sky, we unveiled the shop's renovated facade. Across the top, a hand-stitched wooden sign gleamed in hand-painted gold letters. Mended and made. New neighbors and volunteers gathered as Arian and I cut the ribbon. Scissors buoyed with the same energy that once trimmed the emerald green silk. Cameras snapped, but this time the story felt genuine, heartfelt. A tailor's shop reborn as a haven for healing. A billionaire's mansion opened into the community. As the crowd cheered, I looked at Arian. Smudges of paint on his cheek, a patch of denim on his sweater, eyes alight with both love and purpose. "We did it," I whispered. He wrapped an arm around me. "We did," he agreed. "And this is only the beginning." That evening, back inside the shop, we spread a length of pristine white muslin across my work table. Standing hand in hand, we guided a single needle together, 2 fingers each on the eye, thread catching the light as we pulled it through the fabric. "Together," he murmured. "Always," I replied. We exchanged a soft smile, then slid the fabric under the presser foot. I pressed the foot down, and the machine's steady hum filled the room. That's about you. Needle rose and fell, weaving a line of stitches that gleamed against the white cloth, an unbroken seam symbolizing our shared journey. And if life frays again, threatens to pull us apart, we'll mend it together, stitch by stitch, hand in hand, forever weaving hope into every tear. If Asha and Arian's journey stirred something in you, please like and subscribe. Your support lets us keep weaving these tales of love, loss, and hope. Share in the comments which moment resonated most, or tell us about a time you found beauty in something broken. Hit the bell so you'll never miss the next chapter. And don't forget to pass this video along to someone who could use a reminder that even the most frayed edges can be mended into something beautiful.